Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to register its protest over the ceasefire violations by the Indian forces along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said unprovoked Indian fighting seriously wounded 3 civilians in the hot spring sector. Spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the Indian forces are deliberately targeting civilian population along the LOC. Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shattai says the Arab League has become a symbol of the Arab inaction. This comes as the US is set to host the signing ceremony of the normalization deals involving Israel, Bahrain and the UAE on Tuesday. Shattai said the day will mark the defeat of the Arab League institution. The UN Human Rights Chief says Rohingya Muslims are being targeted in Myanmar's Rakhine state, which may constitute war crimes. Speaking at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Michelle Bachelet said 3 years after the Rohingya exodus, no concrete measures on accountability were taken by the authorities. She called for an investigation into the latest violence, citing satellite images of recently burned areas. The World Health Organization has reported a record one-day increase in global coronavirus cases, with the total rising by over 307,000. The coronavirus has infected over 29 million people, claiming more than 924,000 lives across the globe. India has registered 1,136 deaths and more than 92,000 cases overnight, taking the country's caseload to over 4.8 million. In Pakistan, 4 more people lost their lives in the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to 6,383. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to register its protest over the ceasefire violation by the Indian forces along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said unprovoked Indian fighting seriously wounded 3 civilians in the hot spring sector. Spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said New Delhi cannot divert attention from the grave human rights situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir by raising tensions on the LOC and the working boundary. Chaudhry said the Indian forces are deliberately targeting the civilian population along the line of control. He said 18 civilians have been martyred and 180 were wounded in 2,245 ceasefire violations so far this year. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan is speaking at a ceremony. Let's watch live.
पाकिस्तान से तो ये सारा जो इलाका है इसकी चेंज होने वाला है और इंशाअल्लाह ये जो हमारी स्ट्रेटेजिक लोकेशन है पाकिस्तान की उसका पूरी तरह इस मुल्क को फ़ायदा होगा और पख्तूनख्वा जो कि और ख़ास तौर पे कबायली इलाका जिसने सबसे ज़्यादा कुर्बानियाँ दी हैं वॉर ऑन टेरर में, जो सबसे ज़्यादा मुश्किलात का सामना करना पड़ा, ये जो अब रशाकई और ये जो कनेक्टिविटी और ये जो ट्रेन और ये अफ़गानिस्तान के में अमन आ जाए तो ये इलाके को सबसे ज़्यादा फ़ायदा होगा और उसकी वजह से मैं समझता हूँ हमारा इंटरेस्ट ये है। नौजवान आबादी है पाकिस्तान की, उनको नौकरियाँ मिलेंगी और खुशहाली आएगी। तो मैं पाकिस्तान के लिए भी ये समझता हूँ कि अब जो हमारा अब अगला फेज़ है वो इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन का है पाकिस्तान डी-इंडस्ट्रियलाइज होता गया.
If there happens to be peace in this particular region, especially in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, there will be a lot of benefit and there would be job creation in this specific area. And the next target that Pakistan has is of increasing the industrialization.
तो इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन है अगला रास्ता और इसलिए चाइना का हमें बहुत फ़ायदा है. चाइना से इंडस्ट्री रिलोकेट होना चाहती है. जिस तरह जितनी हम इंडस्ट्रियल जोन्स बनाते जाएंगे हम अट्रैक्ट करेंगे चाइनीज़ इंडस्ट्री, क्योंकि वहाँ लेबर कॉस्ट बहुत बढ़ चुके हैं हमारे मुल्क में. उसके मुकाबले में बड़ी अट्रैक्टिव कंडीशंस है. हमने अब पूरी तरह
इंसेंटिवाइज करना है. As much as we'll be creating the industrial zones over here in Pakistan, it will attract investment from the Chinese investors as their industry wants to relocate to Pakistan as well.
और इंशाल्लाह ये शुरुआत है आगे प्रोग्रेस पाकिस्तान की भी और केपी की भी. शुक्रिया.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan was speaking at a ceremony. You're watching live. Now moving on, Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shatai says the Arab League has become a symbol of Arab inaction. In a cabinet briefing, he said the government will present a recommendation to President Mahmoud Abbas for reconsidering ties with the Arab League. This comes as the White House is set to host the signing ceremony of the normalization agreements involving Israel, Bahrain and the UAE on Tuesday. Calling it a black day, Shatai said this will mark the defeat of the Arab League institution. Last week, an Arab League ministerial meeting failed to adopt a Palestinian draft condemning the UAE-Israel normalization deal. Meanwhile, a report said Israeli forces arrested 297 Palestinians last month in the occupied West Bank. The US and Iran will face off today at the International Court of Justice in a battle over Tehran sanctions. Tehran moved the ICJ in 2018 after President Donald Trump pulled the US out of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Iran's official lawsuit says the reimposed sanctions breached the 1955 Treaty of Amity between the two countries. The US officially ended the treaty 2 years ago, accusing Iran of using the ICJ only for its propaganda purposes. Over the coming weeks, the US is set to challenge the International Court's jurisdiction in the case. Meanwhile, the ICJ says some of the US sanctions breached the Amity Treaty as it was effective at the time of imposing sanctions. A decision on the issue could take several months, with a final judgment can take years. 4 soldiers have been killed as they raided a house in northern Lebanon in pursuit of a militant. In a statement, the army said a patrol unit of Lebanese intelligence was attacked during the raid in Tripoli city. It said the unit was conducting an operation for a militant wanted in connection with a fatal shooting last month. The army said soldiers were attacked with gunfire and a hand grenade in the Minya Jabal al-Bitawi area. The militant was killed hours after the raid as he tried to flee. The World Health Organization has reported a record one-day increase in the global coronavirus cases, with the total rising by over 307,000. More than 5,500 people died overnight across the globe, raising the death toll to over 922,000. Details in this report.
The second wave of COVID-19 is now threatening the economic recovery made in the Americas and Europe. Cases in France, Greece, Italy and the UK are once again on the rise after the countries lifted travel and other restrictions. Further east, Israel has decided to reimpose a 3-week lockdown after a spike in new locally transmitted cases.
I know those measures will exact a heavy price on us all. This is not the kind of holiday we are used to, and we certainly won't be able to celebrate with our extended families. And there will also be those affected by the lockdown, such as business owners and others.
But elsewhere, countries are cautiously opening up travel, businesses and schools as COVID-19 numbers dwindle. Saudi Arabia has decided to partially lift restrictions on international flights after 6 months. New Zealand has announced lifting restrictions on September 21st, with the exception of Auckland due to the second wave of infections there.
So while our aim is to speedily move down alert levels safely, we also need to be focused on the future, on getting back to level 1, but in a sustained way and not rushing there, only having to bounce out of it soon after.
virus continues to ravage India, where hospitals are now running out of oxygen as the country reports close to 100,000 new cases every day. In the last 24 hours, India has registered 1,136 deaths and more than 92,000 cases, taking the country's caseload to over 4.8 million.
Now, students in Pakistan are set to attend schools from tomorrow with strict SOPs due to coronavirus. In a tweet, Prime Minister Imran Khan said the government has worked to ensure that school operations are aligned with public health safety rules. Khan said it is the nation's collective responsibility to ensure that every child can go to school safely. Meanwhile, the health ministry says 4 people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The death toll stands at 6,383. The ministry said 539 have tested positive for the virus overnight, taking the caseload to 302,000. It said over 289,000 people have recovered so far. Libya's eastern-based government, aligned with Commander Khalifa Haftar, has resigned after protests. Frustration has grown in the region over the economic crisis and the power cuts that worsened by LNA's blockade of oil facilities. Head of the Tobruk-based government, Abdullah Thani, submitted his resignation to Aquila Saleh, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Earlier, protesters took to the streets of several eastern cities against the poor living conditions. In the city of Benghazi, demonstrators set fire to the government building. The UN mission to Libya says it has received reports of a civilian killed in clashes between security personnel and protesters. Expressing grave concern, the mission called for an immediate probe into the incident that caused injuries to 3 civilians. Mali's popular opposition movement has rejected a charter for a transition government backed by the ruling army officers. In a statement, the June 5 movement said the resulting document is an attempt by the military to confiscate power. It said the discussions had taken place against a backdrop of intimidation and anti-democratic practices. This comes a day after military junta agreed to establish an 18-month interim government until an election can take place. Spokesperson Musa Kamar said the interim government will either be led by a military officer or a civilian. But West Africa's regional bloc, ECOWAS, has insisted for the interim president to be a civilian. Turkey says Ankara is not giving up its rights in the East Mediterranean and its research vessel returned to the shore. In an interview, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said there will be planned movements backwards and forwards. He said Greece must put aside provocative behavior that raises tension in the region. Akar said Athens' violation of international treaties by arming 18 Aegean islands serves only to sabotage dialogue. The defense minister also slammed French President Emmanuel Macron's attitude towards the dispute in the region. Earlier, Greece welcomed the return of the Turkish survey vessel back to its southern province of Antalya. Tensions in the region have been high since Turkey resumed energy exploration in the East Mediterranean last month. Yoshide Suga has won the governing Liberal Democratic Party vote for leadership and is poised to become Japan's next prime minister. Last month, Japan's longest-serving premier Shinzo Abe resigned because of ill health. Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga bagged 377 of 534 party votes and is the top contender of a parliamentary poll on Wednesday. He will serve out Abe's term as party leader through September 2021. Suga says he will continue Abe's signature strategy of hyper-easy monetary policy, government spending and reforms. Beijing has rejected Washington's criticism over the detention of 12 Hong Kong activists in mainland China. In a tweet, the Chinese Foreign Ministry refuted claims that the detainees were democracy activists. It said the activists were trying to separate Hong Kong from China. Meanwhile, the Hong Kong government has refused to interfere with Chinese law enforcement actions. In a statement, it said the relevant crime falls within the jurisdiction of the mainland and Hong Kong respects their decision. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo questioned the Hong Kong leadership's commitments to protecting its citizens' rights. The activists were arrested nearly 2 weeks ago off the coast of Hong Kong. Welcome back. The death toll from wildfires that have ravaged the United States West Coast has risen to 35. Fire department says crews are struggling to battle the blaze as low moisture and strong winds fan the flames. The fires across Oregon, California and Washington have destroyed thousands of homes, scorching more than 4 million acres. Rampant wildfires scorching the U.S. West Coast have destroyed the small city of Detroit, where many people have been evacuated and most buildings destroyed. Spanning from the southern border to the coast and Clackamas County, the inferno has covered more than 1 million acres across Oregon, reducing entire towns to ashes. The World Health Organization has urged countries to join its COVAX vaccine facility by Friday deadline. Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says it will help ensure a fair and efficient distribution of immunizations. The WHO chief said so far 92 low-income nations are seeking assistance via the facility to combat the pandemic. He says some 80 higher-income nations have expressed interest, but many still haven't confirmed their intention to join.
In our interconnected world, if people in low and middle-income countries miss out on vaccines, the virus will continue to kill and the economic recovery globally will be delayed. I thank the many member states who have expressed interest in joining the COVAX facility, and I urge those of you who have not yet joined to do so by this Friday.
Ants have become the primary business for an entrepreneur who is selling them as pets in Singapore. The city's first shop specializing in pet ants opened in late February before lockdown measures were imposed to curb the spread of COVID-19. This report has more.
Ant farms are not common in countries like the United States or Canada, but they are a rarity in Singapore. A shopkeeper, Jean Yi, started raising ants as a hobby in 2017. He is now aiming to change the negative connotations associated with ants in Singapore. He hopes to collaborate with institutions such as schools to teach children about ants and their life cycle.
I'm trying to change the misconception and educate, young people, children, that actually ants are very enriching. They are so important in the ecosystem. They are actually here for a reason. And then if we could actually just learn from the humble ant, there's so many things that the ant can teach us, like perseverance, being headstrong. I mean, the list just goes on. The ant itself is just really amazing.
The shopkeeper says his ants are all locally sourced and are found by him and his staff around the island after rainstorms. He also sells live worms, which are food for the ants, but says they are also fond of honey and fruit. The shop draws ant lovers and curious onlookers alike. A local resident, Alvin Tang, says it is a special treat to someone who loves ants this much.
Well, crazy. It's really crazy. I said that. If you ask 10 out of 10 people, 9 of them will give the same answer. It's crazy. Definitely it's crazy. If you told me that somebody loves you so much, I mean, maybe it's a trait to them.
The shop offers 30 species of ants sold in the starter kit, ant farms or formicarium, which include ants and a queen. The price ranges from $20 to $220 depending on the type of formicarium and ant species.
A floating cinema has launched a brand new experience for moviegoers in London, aiming to help bring the city's film industry back to life. What about this unique cinema in this report?
After a decline in coronavirus cases, cinemas across the UK were allowed to reopen in July, social distancing rules and face masks. The pandemic sure has brought in some new trends. On Regent's Canal in central London, over 100 moviegoers can float in, moor up and watch stars on the UK's biggest ever riverside screen, listening through noise-cancelling headphones.
Just a comfortable way, I think, that we all feel safe as well, and we feel like we can still spend time together and make memories in such a unique way.
It's just a new way to be safe, but also it's a new way to watch the movie.
In line with government guidance, groups of up to 6 people from different households can take to the water. Open-air cinema is charging just over £16 for a deck chair and £34 per person for a boat for 8 people.
Our revenue drops from March. Our revenue as a production company dropped by about 95%. So our industry has been hit really hard. So it's all about everyone now pivoting and coming up with new ideas, new ways of doing things.
There are worries, though, that as winter approaches, outdoor events like this will not only be hit by worsening weather, but by a second wave of the virus.
The EU's industrial output has posted an annual decline of 7.3% in July due to the slowdown caused by the coronavirus pandemic. But figures from Eurostat show the industrial production rose by 4.1% on a monthly basis in both the Eurozone and the EU. This was due to the easing of measures against the spread of the novel coronavirus. Portugal reported the strongest increase of 12%, followed by Spain and Ireland. Belgium, Denmark and Latvia were the only EU countries to register a month-on-month fall in July. Microsoft says ByDance will not be selling TikTok to the tech giant. Sale negotiations had opened after President Donald Trump threatened to ban Chinese app if an American firm does not acquire its US operations. Microsoft said the proposal rejected by ByDance would have been good for TikTok's users while protecting national security interests. Microsoft said it would have made significant changes to ensure the service met the highest standards for security. The company said it looks forward to seeing how the service evolves in these important areas. Meanwhile, Chinese state media says ByDance will not give the source code for the platform to any US firm. European stocks are hovering around the flat line as investors stay cautious amid resurgence of COVID-19 in the region. The pan-European stock 600 is up fractionally, with tech stocks adding over 1%. London's FTSE and Italy's FTSE MIB has shed marginally. Frankfurt's DAX and Paris's CAC 40 have edged above the flat line. Earlier, stocks in Asia Pacific gained after shares of Japanese conglomerate SoftBank Group soared. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.